Try to imagine waking up without an alarm. No phone buzzing on the corner of the bed. No traffic hissing past the window. No show waiting to be watched. No inbox waiting to be cleared. No meeting waiting to be attended. Instead, your eyes open to the pale gray light seeping into a rock shelter at first light. The air is cool and clean, carrying the smell of smoke and earth. Nearby, you hear low voices, the rest of the group beginning to stir. A baby cries briefly, then settles. Someone laughs quietly. Outside, as the day brightens, birds are calling to one another. This is how human beings woke for hundreds of thousands of years. This was simply what morning was. You are a Homo sapiens, living roughly 40,000 years ago, somewhere in what we would now call Europe, Africa, or Asia. Anatomically, you are identical to a modern human, the same brain size, the same body, the same capacity for language, thought, and feeling. But the world you live in is so different from ours that imagining it honestly is almost difficult. This is the question that has kept archaeologists and anthropologists endlessly curious. What did you actually do all day? Most of us carry the same tired mental image, stitched together from 100 documentaries and films. Grunting, hairy cave dwellers, forever fleeing saber-toothed cats, spending every waking hour in a desperate hunt for food, permanently balanced on the edge of starvation, living a short, brutal, miserable existence, pure survival and nothing else. That is the picture most of us carry. And that picture is almost entirely wrong. The archaeological evidence tells a very different story. Early humans weren't merely surviving. They were genuinely living. They had rich social lives, real leisure time, art, music, and a spiritual world of their own. They told stories around the fire. They decorated their bodies. They carved delicate little figurines and painted breathtaking images on the walls of caves. They cared for their elderly and their disabled. They buried their dead with ceremony, laying grave goods beside them. They had a complex, sophisticated culture, one we are only now beginning to understand, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we talk about cave paintings and burial rites, we need the basics. What did a typical day actually look like? With no job to go to, no bills to pay, no errands to run. How did your ancestors actually spend their time? What did survival mean when it meant something entirely different from what it means today? The answer might surprise you. Early humans probably worked less than you do, that our best window into prehistoric ways of living comes from studying today's remaining hunter-gatherer societies. And that research reveals something striking. People typically spend only 4 to 6 hours a day on subsistence activities, gathering food, hunting, preparing meals, repairing tools, and shelter. That's it. Everything else was left for rest, for socializing, playing, making art, telling stories, or simply doing nothing in particular. It's almost the exact opposite of the progress narrative we've been handed. We imagine our ancestors as desperately poor in time and resources, and ourselves as wealthy and comfortable by comparison. But in terms of actual free time, the truth may run the other way entirely. A prehistoric person's weekly leisure time may well have exceeded what most modern people manage to claim in an entire month. The deeper you look into prehistoric life, the more layered and complicated the picture becomes. Yes, there were real dangers. Injuries were common and often serious. Infant mortality was high. Infections we would now treat with a course of antibiotics could easily be fatal. Average lifespan was shorter than ours, though not nearly as short as people assume. If you survived childhood, your odds of reaching your 50s or 60s weren't bad at all. Some individuals lived considerably longer than that. But here's what really matters. People lived fully within the years they had. They laughed, they loved, they grieved, they created, they struggled, they celebrated. They weren't simply biological machines wired for survival. They were people in every sense we would recognize. They shared our most basic needs, food and shelter. Yes, but also the need for connection, for meaning, for beauty, for play. So let's spend a day together. Not a dramatic one. Not some enormous mammoth hunt or a tense encounter with a rival band. Those happen too. Of course, but this is an ordinary day, 40,000 years ago, in which an early human wakes with the dawn and lives out a life that feels both deeply foreign to us and, in strange ways, oddly familiar. Because understanding how our ancestors spent their time doesn't just teach us about the past, it raises some uncomfortable questions about the present. How are we actually living right now? What has civilization really given us? What might we have lost along the way? Is what we call progress always, in fact, progress? Let's start at the beginning. In the rock shelter where the gray light of dawn is spreading, you don't wake to an alarm. There is no such thing as an alarm. There is no concept of being late. There is no schedule to keep, no boss waiting on you. Instead, consciousness returns slowly and naturally, drawn to the surface by the brightening sky and the stirring bodies around you. The first thing you notice is the cold, not the bone-deep, life-threatening cold of winter, but a crisp morning chill, just sharp enough to make leaving your warm, sleeping spot feel like a small negotiation with yourself. You're lying on dried grass and animal hides, leaned against the other members of your group, not necessarily out of affection, though that's often part of it, but out of simple survival instinct. Body heat is too valuable a resource to waste. The second thing you notice is the smell. Smoke, always smoke. Right now it's faint, because last night's bright fire has burned down to embers, mixed with the smell of unwashed bodies. Not exactly unpleasant, just human. The lingering scent of last night's meal, the shelter's own particular smell of earth and mineral, maybe a hint of salt air if you're near a coast, or the green smell of fresh spring growth if you're inland. And someone is already awake. Someone is always awake. Sleep in the Paleolithic wasn't like modern sleep. Both studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies and sleep science itself suggest that people most likely practiced what scientists call biphasic or even polyphasic sleep. You'd sleep for a few hours after dark, and wake for a stretch in the middle of the night. This wasn't insomnia. This was normal. During that waking period, people talked quietly, tended the fire, checked on the children, sometimes made love, or simply lay there, letting their minds wander through whatever thoughts arise when the world is dark and silent. It meant that at any given moment of the night, someone was reliably awake, listening to the sounds that didn't belong. A predator's footstep, a snapping branch, a distant howl signaling that danger had passed nearby. Safety was never something you could assume. It was something you protected, hour by hour, through vigilance and cooperation. Whoever is awake right now is tending the fire. You can hear the soft sounds of movement, see the sudden flare of light as flames catch fresh fuel. Fire management was perhaps the single most important skill your group possessed. Let it go out completely, and you'd have to relight it, either by carrying embers from another group's fire miles away, or through the exhausting, time-consuming friction of it. Far better to keep it alive, with someone taking responsibility for tending it through the night. Who took on that job varied. Sometimes it was the elders, who tended to sleep more lightly anyway, and had proven their worth to the group in 1,000 different ways over the years. Sometimes it was young adults without small children who required their full attention. Sometimes the duties simply rotated, guided by an unspoken shared understanding that everyone contributed to the survival of the whole dot as the fire grows. More people begin to stir. Children first. Children generally wake ready to move, ready to play, just as they do today. You hear a small sound, the rustle of bodies, a mother's soft murmur to her child. Stay close, stay warm, wait for the sun. But children are never very good at waiting. Within a few minutes, a couple of the older ones are up, stretching, walking toward the fire, their breath fogging in the cold air. The adults wake more slowly. There's no rush, an understanding that is important. Hurrying, rushing, racing against the clock. These are all modern inventions. Your day is governed by light, hunger, weather, the seasons. The sun has only just begun painting the eastern horizon gray and pink. There are still hours before anything truly needs to happen. Right now, the most important thing is simply moving from sleep to wakefulness without wasting the precious calories you'll need for whatever the day brings. So people stretch slowly and deliberately, working the stiffness out of muscles that slept on the ground. They yawn, they scratch, they attend to basic bodily needs. If you're in a rock shelter or cave, there's likely a designated spot for this. Far enough from camp to avoid contamination, but close enough to remain safe. If you're at a temporary camp, people simply walk a short distance into the surrounding brush. One of the more experienced members of the group probably steps beyond the sleeping area to survey the surroundings. Not paranoid exactly, just careful. What changed overnight? Are there tracks around camp that weren't there yesterday? What's the weather doing? Is that cloud in the west bringing rain, or will it pass? Is the wind shifting direction? What different smells is it carrying? What information about the wider world? This morning assessment matters enormously. Paleolithic people could read signs to a degree we can barely imagine. They could tell from the behavior of birds whether a predator was nearby. They could read the weather days in advance by watching clouds, sensing humidity, observing how different plants responded to atmospheric shifts. They could identify animals purely from their tracks, when they had passed, whether they were healthy or injured, whether they were traveling alone or in a herd. All of this information gets processed and, critically, shared. As more people wake and gather around the growing fire, conversation begins. Quietly at first, then rising as the group's collective awareness comes online. Dreams often come up. The Paleolithic mind likely didn't draw a sharp line between waking reality and the reality of dreams. A vivid dream could be interpreted as a message worth discussing, a warning. A visit from an ancestor. Plans start to form, loosely, without pressure. The group needs food. It always does. The only question is what kind and where to find it. Someone may have noticed yesterday that a patch of berries was nearly ripe. Someone else might have spotted the tracks of a large animal moving through a particular valley. A third person, if you're near water, might suggest checking the fishing spots. None of this is an order. No one holds authority the way we understand leadership today. Decisions emerge on their own, through discussion, through consensus, through people naturally deferring to whoever has the relevant expertise. But all of that lies ahead. For now, in these early morning moments, the main activity is simply being together. The band, your extended family, your survival unit, reassembling itself after the night has scattered it. Everyone survived another vulnerable night. Everyone is here, whole, ready for a new day. There's real comfort in that. Safety in numbers, yes, but something deeper too. Something that explains why humans are so fundamentally social. We evolved, quite literally, to need each other. Those who found comfort in groups, who drew strength from kinship, who took pleasure in cooperation, those were the ones who survived. We are their descendants, carrying genes that make loneliness feel wrong and community feel necessary. By now the children are playing. Their energy is infectious. There's no particular game, no formal rules, just running, chasing, wrestling, physical play that builds strength and coordination. The adults watch with half their attention, letting the kids be kids, but ready to step in if the play gets too rough or someone wanders too far. Meanwhile, practical tasks are quietly getting done. Someone checks yesterday's tools. Is that spear point still seated firmly in its shaft? Did that carrying basket develop a weak spot yesterday that needs mending? Is there enough cordage for today's needs, or does someone need to make more? None of this feels like chore in the modern sense. None of it is the unpleasant thing you have to get through before doing what you actually want to do. It's simply part of life, as natural as breathing. And all of it unfolds without any sense of time pressure whatsoever. The sun climbs higher, and the morning chill begins to fade. It's probably been about an hour since you woke, though there's no real way to measure that, and no particular reason to care. Your stomach starts reminding you that it's empty. Everyone else is probably feeling the same thing. Soon, attention will shift toward food, but not quite yet. For now, you're warm, you're safe. You're surrounded by people who know you and genuinely care whether you survive. Because your survival improves their odds too. That's what waking up in the Paleolithic looks like. No jarring return to consciousness. No scramble to get ready. Just a slow, collective drift from sleep to wakefulness, guided by light and body and the ancient rhythms that governed human life for hundreds of thousands of years. It's such a fundamental pattern that we still carry its imprint in our biology, that instinct to linger, to wake gradually, to ease into the day rather than attack it. That isn't laziness. That's your Paleolithic brain remembering how mornings used to work. Back when time was abundant and the only real schedule was the sun's slow arc across the sky. Let's talk about breakfast. Though your ancestors' breakfast, 40,000 years ago, looked nothing like what you're picturing. Nobody woke at 7, shuffled to a kitchen, and poured cereal into a bowl. There was no such thing as mealtime. People ate when food was available, when hunger demanded it, when opportunity presented itself. That might sound chaotic, but it wasn't. It was perfectly adapted to the reality. They lived in that picture, waking in that rock shelter as the first light filters through the entrance. Your stomach growls. You're hungry. You eat. It really is that simple. What you eat depends entirely on what's available. Maybe there's meat left from a kill 2 days ago, hanging wrapped in the deer's own hide in the shaded back corner of the shelter, out of direct sunlight. Autumn's cool air has kept it from spoiling too badly, though a faint smell has begun to develop, which probably means it needs to be finished today. You tear off a strip and chew slowly. It's tough, genuinely demanding on the jaw, but the protein and fat are exactly what your body needs after a night's rest. Your teeth are strong, your jaw muscles well developed. Dental analysis on Paleolithic skulls shows striking wear patterns, a lifetime of processing tough food. But those teeth reveal something else too. Microscopic plant residues, starch grains from roots and tubers, phytoliths from seeds and nuts. Your ancestors weren't eating only meat. They were eating everything. Beside the meat sits a wooden bowl, really more of a shell fragment, sealed and mended with pine resin, filled with nuts gathered 3 days earlier. You crack a few between your back teeth, a technique passed down across generations, one that children learn from infancy by watching the adults around them, the exact angle and pressure needed to break the shell without crushing what's inside. Next to the nuts sits a leather pouch of dried fruit, sun-dried berries gathered at the peak of summer's abundance, their sweetness now concentrated into a wrinkled, chewy handful. The sugar hits your system fast, quick energy. But the real treasure sits in the basket of roots by the fire, almost certainly gathered yesterday by one of the older women, whose decades of accumulated plant knowledge make her one of the group's most valuable members. These are reedy, starchy, nourishing roots, but nearly inedible raw. That's why they've been set near the fire, not in it. close enough that the heat slowly breaks down their tough fibers and converts their complex starches into digestible sugars. This is cooking, though not in any sense you'd recognize. No recipe, no precise temperature, no timer, just generations of accumulated knowledge about what heat does to different foods. The roots have sat there all night, slowly roasting in the fire's residual warmth, never quite going out. By morning, they're soft enough to eat, sweet enough to enjoy. You pull one out, careful not to burn your fingers, hot but manageable. You peel back the outer skin and bite in. By modern standards, it's not delicious, but it's filling, and more importantly, it's safe. Raw, these roots contain toxins that cause serious stomach distress. Cooked, they become perfectly edible. This transformation, using fire to convert plants into food, may be one of the single most important technological leaps in human history. It effectively doubled or tripled the number of plant species your ancestors could eat. Tubers that were toxic raw became staple foods once roasted. Seeds that would otherwise pass through the digestive system unchanged became valuable nutrition once ground and heated. Doubt the evidence for this incredible dietary diversity comes from multiple sources. Archaeological sites across Europe and Africa have yielded coprolites, fossilized feces, and when scientists examine them under a microscope, they find a striking variety of plant remains, dozens of different seed types, pollen grains, leaf and root and bark fragments. Some coprolites even contain insects, grasshoppers, beetle larvae, termites. These might not sound appetizing to a modern Western palate, but they're actually excellent sources of protein and fat, and many contemporary hunter-gatherer societies consider insects a delicacy. There's no reason to think your ancestors felt any differently. Dental calculus, the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth, tells a similar story. When archaeologists scrape it from Paleolithic skulls and examine it under powerful microscopes, they find a broad range of plant starches, wild grains, root vegetables, nuts, fruits, even plant fibers likely chewed for moisture or other purposes. All this evidence paints a picture of incredible dietary flexibility. Your ancestors weren't specialists. They were opportunists, capable of exploiting nearly every food source their environment offered. Coastal groups supplemented fish, shellfish, seaweed, seabirds, and marine mammals with whatever plants grew near the shore. Inland forest dwellers ate deer, wild boar, nuts, fruits, roots, and mushrooms. River communities ate fish, waterfowl, aquatic plants, and the land animals that came to drink. This flexibility was critical for survival. Environments change, seasons shift, animal migrations follow unpredictable patterns. A group that could only eat one or two types of food would face starvation the moment those resources dwindled. But a group that could eat 50 different things could always find something. As you eat, everyone around you is doing the same. A young mother shares nuts with her small child, showing him how to crack them without losing pieces to the shell fragments. He's not very good at it yet. His small hands lack the strength and coordination, but he's learning, and within a few years, he'll be teaching his own younger siblings. An older woman is preparing something more elaborate. She's pounding meat between two stones, mixing it with rendered fat and dried fruit, making something like pemmican, though of course she has no word for it. Just food that lasts, dense nutrition that can be carried on long journeys or saved for lean times. This knowledge is technical and precise. The ratio of meat, fat, and fruit has to be exactly right, or it spoils. The pounding has to be thorough, or the mixture won't hold together. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers. A chain of knowledge stretching back thousands of generations that no one eats alone. It almost never happens. Food is social, shared, distributed according to complex rules everyone understands implicitly. The hunter who brought down yesterday's kill doesn't eat more than anyone else. If anything, he might eat less, because that's how the system works. You hunt an animal, you share it with the group. When someone else makes a kill, they share with you. It's insurance, risk pooling, the social glue holding the group together. Children dart back and forth, stealing bites from various adults, playfully swatted away or handed food outright. No one is stingy with children. There's always enough for them, or if there isn't, the adults simply eat less so the little ones are fed. The meal isn't formal or ceremonial. People eat standing, sitting, wandering, checking tools, talking, laughing, but it still serves vital social functions. Everyone is together. Bonds are reinforced, information is shared, the day gets planned. Who's gathering plants today? Who's hunting? Who's continuing to work that deer hide? These decisions form organically, not through orders, but through consensus. Throughout this conversation, food preparation continues, always continues. Someone is grinding seeds between stones. Someone else is sorting dried herbs, discarding any showing signs of mold. A teenager is learning to slice thin strips of meat, preparing them for drying. These skills matter enormously and are learned entirely through observation and practice. There's no written recipe, no formal instruction. Children watch the adults, try to imitate them, get corrected, try again. By the time they reach adulthood, they possess an almost encyclopedic knowledge of food, which plants are edible and when, how to recognize them across different seasons, where to find them, how to process and store them. This body of knowledge is genuinely impressive. Ethnographic research on modern hunter-gatherers shows that these communities typically hold detailed knowledge of 200 to 300 plant species, which parts are edible, which need processing, which are medicinal, which are toxic, which are useful for cordage or arrow poison or other purposes. Your ancestors almost certainly held comparable knowledge. They had to. Their survival depended on it. Eat the wrong mushroom, and you die. Fail to properly prepare certain roots, and you spend 3 days doubled over with debilitating cramps. As the morning meal winds down, a few more sticks go onto the fire. If someone's paying attention, the embers never fully die. Fire is precious, and starting one from scratch is genuinely difficult. Far better to keep it alive, feed it steadily, protect it from rain and wind. Someone is always responsible, usually rotating between different people over time. The meal wasn't extravagant, but it was sufficient. Everyone ate something. Stomachs are reasonably full. Energy levels are enough for whatever the day demands. And really, that's all that matters. Your ancestors weren't gourmets, but they understood nutrition in a deep, instinctive way. They understood the importance of variety, the way different foods offered different benefits. The fact that maintaining balance across days and weeks mattered far more than achieving perfection in any single meal. They ate to live, but they also lived, in some real sense, to eat. Food was pleasurable, even in its simplicity. The satisfaction of cracking a nut perfectly, the sweetness of ripe fruit, the rich fattiness of marrow roasted in the coals. These weren't just calories. They were experiences, shared moments, ways of connecting to the natural world and to one another. And once the morning had properly arrived, once stomachs were full, the real work of the day was about to begin. Here's something no one tells you about prehistoric life. The hunt is always the part that gets glamorized. Dramatic encounters with mammoths, coordinated takedowns of deer, tense standoffs with predators. These capture our imagination. They're what fill museums and documentaries. But for someone actually living 40,000 years ago, a much plainer truth is this: hunting was the exception. Gathering was the rule. On any given day, 60 to 80% of your calories came from plants, roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, fruits, leaves, flowers. The exact percentage shifted with season and location. Coastal groups might get more protein from shellfish. Northern communities might rely more heavily on meat through the long winters. But for most human populations, most of the time, plants were what kept you standing. This wasn't because your ancestors loved vegetables. It was simple evolutionary math. A successful hunt could feed your band for days on end, but hunts failed far more often than they succeeded. Animals are fast, unpredictable, and dangerous, requiring hours of tracking, careful coordination, and no small amount of luck. Plants, meanwhile, stay put. They grow in predictable patterns anyone with sufficient knowledge can learn to read, right where you left them last season. So while the hunters chased glory, the vast majority of your band spent most of their time doing the real work of staying alive, scanning the landscape with practiced eyes, reading signs invisible to outsiders, gathering the food that would actually make it into tonight's meal. We should be careful about assumptions here. For decades, anthropologists told a tidy story about prehistoric gender roles. Men hunted, women gathered. Presented as natural, inevitable, maybe even biologically determined. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. Yes, in many prehistoric societies, women and older children did the bulk of the gathering. Men specialized more often in hunting, though not always, and probably not even in most cases. Archaeological evidence from various sites shows women buried alongside hunting weapons. Isotope analysis on ancient bones reveals some women ate diets just as meat-heavy as any male hunter. Some groups organized communal hunts everyone participated in. In others, expert gatherers of both sexes devoted their entire lives to perfecting plant knowledge. The truth is probably that prehistoric societies were pragmatic. They organized labor around their specific circumstances. Pregnant or nursing women may have focused more on gathering, since it was compatible with carrying an infant. Women past their reproductive years, freed from those constraints, may have become some of the group's most valuable hunters. The critical point: don't imagine gathering as somehow less important or less prestigious than hunting. It required real expertise, years of training, and it kept everyone alive. Now imagine yourself on one of those gathering trips. Mid-morning, the dawn mist has burned off. The sun has been up for a few hours. You set out with 3 others. Your aunt, who knows the location of every plant better than anyone else in your band. Your 11-year-old niece, still learning the roots and the knowledge behind them. And your own 3-year-old, strapped to your back in a carefully softened deerskin sling. You're not wandering randomly. You're following a mental map built through years of observation. The oak grove 3 miles north should have ripe hazelnuts right about now. The wild onion patch by the stream will have gone past its season, but just beyond it, there's a reed field where you can dig starchy roots. If you're lucky, you might come across a beehive full of honey. If you're really lucky, bird eggs. The walk itself is no gentle stroll. You'll cover somewhere between 5 and 10 miles today, much of it over terrain that would challenge even a modern hiker. Rocky slopes, dense brush, streams to cross, inclines to climb, all while carrying a child and your working tools. A digging stick, smoothed by use and hardened over the fire, several tightly woven baskets, a small leather pouch for smaller finds, maybe a stone knife carried on a belt of twisted plant fiber. But what makes gathering so different from hunting isn't adrenaline or drama. It's attention. You read the landscape like a book, noticing details invisible to an outsider as slight. Color shift in the soil that hints at wild tubers growing beneath an animal trail. Pattern that suggests a fruit tree. Nearby, the particular angle of sunlight that tells you which side of a hill holds ripe fruit. Your aunt stops on a patch of ground that looks unremarkable to you, but she's seeing something you're still learning to see, a particular herb that always grows near edible roots. She sinks her digging stick into the earth, probing carefully. 3 inches down, it hits something solid. She works the stick around it, loosening the soil, then reaches in with her hands and pulls out a tuber the size of your fist. Pale, gnarled, entirely unappetizing to look at. But you know from experience that roasted tonight in the coals, it will turn sweet and filling. She hands it to you. You place it carefully in your basket. She digs again, another tuber, another. This spot is productive. Within 10 minutes, you've gathered enough to feed everyone tonight. There might be more here tomorrow, but your work isn't done yet. Your aunt knows these plants by heart. More importantly, she knows their stories, and stories are how knowledge gets remembered. She tells your niece about the time her own grandmother got violently sick eating something that looked almost exactly like this root, but had slightly different leaves. She shows the difference. This plant has 5 veins instead of 3. That tiny distinction is the difference between food and something that would stop your breathing within hours. This is education, though nothing like sitting in a classroom. Real plants, hands-on demonstration, reinforced by years of observation. Survival knowledge in its purest form. Your niece will absorb hundreds of lessons like this one. By your age, she'll recognize roughly 300 plant species by sight, across every season, in every location. She'll know which are edible, which are medicinal, which will kill you. She'll know when to gather each one, how to prepare it, what it's used for. Modern botanists spend years in university learning to identify plants. Your ancestors learned it out of necessity, starting young, because getting it wrong could mean death. The group moves on. You cross a shallow stream, cold water splashing against your legs. On the far bank, your aunt spots something that makes her smile. Mushrooms growing on a fallen log. She approaches carefully, examines them from several angles, even smells them. Mushrooms demand rigorous evaluation. Some are nourishing and delicious. Others cause severe illness. A few can kill. She takes 3, leaves the rest. She's confident about these, but caution is always warranted. The hours pass in this rhythm. Walk, observe, gather. The baby on your back has fallen asleep, lulled by the gentle movement. Your baskets grow heavier. Wild grapes, still a little sour but edible. Once you're back at camp, you'll grind the seeds of a meadow grass into flour. Bark from a particular tree makes a fever-reducing tea when boiled. Your aunt gathers it carefully, taking only what's needed, never enough to harm the tree. She learned that lesson long ago. Strip a plant bare, and it won't be there the next time you need it. Groups who learned this survived. Groups who didn't face starvation once the resources ran out by early afternoon. You're a few miles from camp. Your legs are tired. Your shoulders ache under the weight of the baskets. But there's something almost meditative in this work. No rush, no pressure. Just walking and gathering. The warmth of the sun, birds calling to each other in the canopy above you. You're in a state of full presence, the kind modern people rarely experience. Every sense is engaged. You listen for the rustle of leaves that might signal a predator nearby. You watch for the glint of water ahead that would signal a stream. You smell for smoke that might mean another band is camped nearby. Your niece asks a question. She spotted a plant with bright red berries and wants to know if it's safe. Your aunt doesn't just answer. She walks over, examines it, and begins a story about how her own mother once discovered these berries during a difficult winter when other food had run out, and how the berries saved the band through 3 days of blizzard. How birds can safely eat them raw, but humans need to cook them first, or risk severe stomach cramps. Knowledge keeps flowing. Every plant is a lesson. Every place is a memory. This landscape isn't just territory to your people. It's a library. Every tree, every stone, every stream carries knowledge accumulated across generations. Your ancestors never wrote anything down, but they were far from ignorant. They were the keepers of an ecological knowledge base, as sophisticated as anything a modern scientist could compile. Eventually, late in the afternoon, the group heads back to camp. The baskets are full now, heavy with enough food to feed the whole band tonight. You've walked roughly 8 miles today. Your feet ache. Your back is sore. The baby has woken up and wants to nurse. But you feel satisfied. This was good work, important work, the kind that keeps everyone alive. When you return to camp, there won't be any celebration, the way there might be after a successful hunt. No one will make a fuss over your return, but everyone knows the truth. The hunters might come back empty-handed tonight. Often they do. But you brought food. Reliable, nourishing, life-sustaining food. And tomorrow, you'll go out and do it again. This is the rhythm that kept humanity alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Not dramatic moments, but patient, wise, determined gathering work. Your ancestors rid the landscape in ways we've almost entirely forgotten, paying attention to nature with an intensity most modern people never experience. And they did it not as a hobby or a spiritual practice, but simply as the fundamental work of staying alive. Here's another thing that might surprise you. Your ancestors probably hadn't hunted today, or yesterday, or possibly even this week. We carry this image of prehistoric life as a relentless struggle, early humans, waking every morning to chase mammoths or wrestle saber-toothed cats. Hollywood loves this narrative, the daily deathmatch between human and beast. But the reality was far more interesting and far more strategic. For early humans, hunting wasn't a daily burden. It was a high-stakes event that happened only occasionally, requiring significant planning, patience, and more often than not, ending in failure. A successful hunt might happen every few days if you were lucky, every few weeks if you weren't. The rest of the time, you were preparing, planning, tracking, and most importantly, relying on gathering to fill your stomach. But when a hunt did happen, it was extraordinary. Let's say today is one of those days. The signs had been building for a while. Yesterday, scouts found fresh tracks of a small gazelle herd crossing a valley about 8 kilometers from camp. The animals are moving toward a seasonal water source, following patterns your people have observed for generations. The timing is right, the weather is clear, and most importantly, a few experienced hunters are healthy enough and ready to make the attempt. This is how it begins, not with a sudden impulse, but with careful assessment. A group of 6 men and 2 women, proven trackers and hunters, gather early in the morning to discuss the plan, using a combination of spoken language and hand signals refined over thousands of years. Who takes which position? Where the animals are most likely to go? What are the alternatives if things don't go as planned? They carry spears, each one a small masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, requiring days to make. The wooden shaft, carefully straightened and dried over a fire across many days to prevent warping. The stone point, knapped from high-quality flint obtained through trade from a quarry 400 kilometers away. The plant resin and sinew binding, processed and dried to create a bond stronger than most modern glues. Some of the hunters also carry an atlatl, a spear thrower, which uses leverage to triple both the speed and distance of a thrown spear. This technology is relatively new to your region, perhaps only a few thousand years old, but it's already transforming hunting the way the bow eventually will. Thousands of years later, the group sets out, and you immediately notice something. They're not rushing. There's no frantic chase, no dramatic sprint across the savannah. Instead, they move at a steady, sustainable pace, reading the landscape as they go. This is where hunting becomes a science. One of the trackers crouches beside a sandy patch of ground, studying it for a long moment before signaling to the others. The track is fresh, probably from this morning, and its depth and clarity tell him the animal was walking calmly, unaware of any threat. The spacing between prints suggests a young adult. Healthy, well-fed, but not too large to bring down. A single hoof print tells him all of this. It's not magic dot. It's pattern recognition earned through a lifetime of observation. Your people have been tracking animals since childhood, learning to read the landscape like a book. Every broken twig, every displaced pebble, every scuff mark on a rock surface tells part of the story. Around midday, they spot the herd, 8 gazelles grazing near a watering hole in a shallow valley. Now comes the critical decision. Try to close within spear range and ambush them, or use the technique humans have perfected above nearly every other predator. They choose the endurance hunt. This is what makes humans such terrifying hunters. We can't outrun almost any animal. A healthy gazelle can hit 80 kilometers an hour. A human, at absolute best, tops out around 24. But we have something no other animal possesses. We can run for hours in the heat of the day without overheating. Most animals, covered in fur and lacking an efficient cooling system, must stop to rest after intense exertion or risk cooking from the inside. Humans, with our hairless bodies and remarkable sweating capacity, are built precisely for this kind of endurance. The hunters spread out and begin jogging toward the herd. Not sprinting, a steady, sustainable pace. The gazelles spot them instantly and bolt, vanishing over a ridge within seconds. But the humans don't stop. They keep the same pace, following the tracks. An hour passes. 2 hours. The sun is scorching now, hot enough to drive most predators into the shade. But the humans keep moving. Their bodies are built exactly for this kind of endurance. Yes, they're sweating heavily, but that's precisely the point. Every drop evaporating from their skin carries away heat that would otherwise cook their muscles. They find the herd again. The gazelles run, but they're showing signs of stress now. Tongues out, breathing hard. They're not cooling fast enough. The chase continues. 3 hours. 4. The trackers rotate positions, some falling back while others maintain the pressure. This is cooperative hunting at its highest level. No single human could pull this off alone. But a coordinated group, constantly communicating, sharing the effort, can accomplish what seems impossible. Finally, after nearly 5 hours, they close in on a single gazelle that's separated from the herd. The animal is stumbling now. Its cooling system has failed. The combination of heat and exhaustion has begun locking up its muscles. One hunter gets close enough to throw. The spear flies, striking behind the shoulder. Within moments, it's over. The hunters gather around the fallen animal. There's no cheering yet, no celebration. First comes the practical work. Someone makes a quick, precise cut. Someone offers a prayer or acknowledgement. We can't know the exact words or gestures, but evidence from multiple prehistoric sites suggests early humans performed some kind of ritual around a successful hunt. Respect for the animal that gave its life. Gratitude to whatever spirits or forces they believed governed the hunt. Then comes the butchering, itself a sophisticated technical operation. These hunters know animal anatomy better than most modern surgeons know human anatomy. Every muscle group, every organ, every usable part, they work quickly and efficiently. The hide comes off in a single piece, valuable for clothing and shelter. The best cuts of meat are set aside both for eating right away and for carrying back to camp. Organs that spoil quickly are prepared to eat on the spot. Nothing goes to waste. Even the bones will eventually be cracked open for marrow, one of the most nutrient-dense foods available. But there's a problem. They've produced several 100 pounds of meat and material 8 kilometers from camp. They can't carry it all at once, and leaving it unattended means lions, hyenas, and vultures will claim it within hours. This is where the social dimension of hunting becomes critical. 2 runners set off toward camp to bring reinforcements. The rest stay with the kill, building a fire to keep predators away and beginning to smoke a portion of the meat. Within a few hours, more people arrive from camp, elders, children old enough to help carry, nursing mothers who've left their infants with relatives. Everyone joins the harvest. The walk back to camp becomes a celebration. Successful hunts are rare enough to become genuine social events. Tonight, there will be a feast. Stories told around the fire, likely dancing and music. The hunters will recount the chase in detail, and through the retelling, it will become part of the community's collective memory. Another story teaching the young about strategy, persistence, and cooperation. But let's be clear, this doesn't happen every day, or even every week. For every successful hunt, there are dozens of failed attempts. Trails that lead nowhere. Animals too fast or too alert. Injuries that force hunters to turn back. Hunts that fail despite everyone doing everything right. And understanding this is critical to understanding prehistoric life. Hunting was important. It provided concentrated protein and fat that gathering alone couldn't supply. Social bonds forged in cooperative hunts reinforced group cohesion. The skills required, tracking, tool-making, strategic planning, pushed the development of human intelligence and communication. But it was never the primary calorie source for most prehistoric groups. That honor belonged to gathering, which happened every day provided most of the nutrition, and carried far less mortal risk. Hunting was sometimes a high-stakes gamble that paid off spectacularly. Opportunistic triumph. What made early humans successful wasn't being the best hunters. It was being good enough at hunting, while also being excellent at everything else. Gathering, tool-making, social cooperation, adapting to new environments, generalists who deployed specialized skills when needed. And when the hunt succeeded, it was just one thread in the complex fabric of prehistoric survival. Whether or not today's hunt succeeds, tomorrow there will be roots to dig, nuts to gather, tools to repair, children to teach, the endless, patient work of survival in a world that could be generous and beautiful, ready to reward those who were clever, persistent, and cooperative. The gazelle is gone now, transformed into food, clothing, and tools. But the knowledge of how it was hunted lives on. It passes from this generation to the next, examined and refined with every retelling, until it stops being merely a survival strategy and becomes culture by afternoon. Camp comes alive with a sound any craftsperson throughout history would recognize. The rhythmic tap of stone against stone. Not loud, not violent, just persistent. Purposeful. The sound of someone creating something that didn't exist before. Your aunt sits near the central fire on a flat rock, a hammerstone in one hand, a piece of flint in the other. Every few seconds she strikes the flint at precisely the right angle, and a small flake scatters onto the ground, joining a scattering of rejected pieces and failed attempts around her. 40,000 years later, these very archaeological traces will still be telling stories to people who've learned how to read stone. This wasn't occasional work. It was as essential and daily as eating or sleeping, because tools didn't last forever. The spear point you used yesterday might have shattered against bone. The scraper you used last week to work a hide has gone dull, nearly useless now. In a world without metal, without mass production, without the luxury of simply buying a replacement, you made your own tools, or you didn't survive. What's surprising is how difficult this actually was. What archaeologists call flint knapping wasn't something you could sit down and figure out in an afternoon. It required years to master, an intimate understanding of how stone behaves. Different stones fractured differently. Flint was predictable. Obsidian was sharp but brittle. You needed to know where to find good stone, how to test it, how to recognize quality before investing hours of work. Watching your aunt work, you'd see expertise built over a lifetime. She wasn't randomly striking rocks. She was reading the stone, seeing fracture lines invisible to untrained eyes. Every strike was calculated. Too hard, and the piece would shatter uselessly. Too soft, and nothing would happen. The angle had to be exact. The point of impact precisely chosen. This was geometry and physics, applied entirely through intuition and muscle memory. She'd spent the last hour shaping this piece of flint into what's called a prepared core, carefully removing flakes to create the right shape and angle. Now she was ready for the payoff. One perfect strike, and a long, thin blade separated cleanly from the core, sharp enough to cut hide or meat with minimal pressure. She examined it critically, running her thumb along the edge, then nodded. Good enough, but not yet finished. For the blade to be truly useful, it needed to be hafted, attached to a handle. And this is where craft became art. She'd prepared a handle earlier, a piece of hardwood with a groove carved into one end. Now she pulled out a small leather pouch containing pine resin, which becomes sticky once heated and gathered. The batch had been mixed with a bit of charcoal and crushed bone. This was the Paleolithic equivalent of a modern superglue. Watching her work, you'd notice something fascinating. She didn't need to think about most of the steps. Her hands moved automatically through processes she'd performed thousands of times. Heating the resin over the fire, applying it to the handle groove, positioning the blade with precision, wrapping thin sinew that would shrink and tighten as it dried, binding everything together. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes, but it was fed by decades of experience and knowledge accumulated across generations. Nearby, your brother was tackling an entirely different kind of problem. In his hands was a piece of antler from the deer hunted 3 days ago. He was slowly, patiently, carving it into a spear point. This was different work than stoneworking. Antler is organic, flexible, able to absorb impacts that would shatter stone, but it's also difficult to shape, requiring different tools and different techniques. He used a stone burin, a chisel-like tool, to scrape and carve the antler. The work was tedious, producing a steady, soft scraping sound that counterpointed your aunt's rhythmic napping. Each pass left fine curls of antler falling to a small pile at his feet. He'd pause occasionally, testing the edge and balance against his thumb. This point would be different from the stone-tipped spears most hunters used. Lighter, more flexible, able to fly farther, and less likely to shatter on impact, but taking hours to make. Antler could only be obtained when someone successfully hunted a deer or similar animal. Stone was everywhere. Antler was rare, so you used it carefully, saved it for special purposes, and made sure everyone in the group knew who had made what. Because here's something the archaeological record has only recently revealed. Prehistoric craftspeople took pride in their work. We know this because we find tools more beautiful than functionality alone would require. Stone points shaped with perfect symmetry when an asymmetric edge would have worked just as well. Bone needles decorated with tiny carved motifs. Antler spear throwers carved into the shapes of animal figures. No one decorates something purely functional unless they care about aesthetics, unless they want their work recognized and admired. Your brother's spear point would be effective, yes, but it would also be beautiful because when you carried it, when you used it to feed your family, you wanted everyone to know whose hands had made it. Status, reputation, identity, all of it transmitted through craftsmanship. On the other side of camp, 3 women were engaged in an equally essential task, making clothing. One was stretched over a wooden frame, scraping a deer hide clean with a stone tool, removing every last trace of fatty tissue from the inner surface. The sound was distinctive, a rhythmic scraping echoing across camp. This wasn't quick work. A single hide could take hours of scraping. And even once that was done, the work wasn't finished. The hide needed either smoking over a fire or working with a mixture of brain matter and fat that would keep it from stiffening as it dried. Brain tanning was laboratory chemistry without a laboratory, the product of centuries of trial and error. Someone somehow discovered that brains contained exactly the right compounds to preserve hide. Maybe by accident, maybe through systematic experimentation. Either way, the knowledge had been passed down through generations. Beside her, her sister worked on a hide that had already been tanned. In her hand was a sharpened bone awl used to punch holes. Slowly and methodically, she was sewing a garment. Punch a hole, pass sinew through, punch another hole. By modern standards, the stitching was rough, but remarkably functional. These garments would be warm, durable, and flexible. They'd last for seasons, maybe years. They would protect their wearers from cold that could otherwise kill within hours. The third woman was doing something that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. She was sewing with an actual needle, a tiny piece of bone with a hole drilled through one end, sinew threaded through it. This technology was less than 20,000 years old at this point in your timeline, a relatively recent invention that had fundamentally transformed clothing production. With needles, you could sew garments that actually fit the body, that could be decorated with beads or painted leather strips. She was making winter clothing for her daughter, furred, layered, warm enough to withstand the harsh cold coming in a few months. The little girl sat nearby, watching intently, occasionally trying to help. This is how knowledge passed down, not through formal instruction, but through constant observation and imitation. By age 10, this girl would be competent at basic hide work. By 20, if she stuck with it, she might be one of the group's most skilled leather workers. But not everything being made was clothing or tools. An old man sat working alone on something smaller and more delicate. In his hand was a collection of shells, obtained last summer through a week-long trading journey to a visiting group from the distant coast. Now, using a stone drill, he was carefully boring tiny holes into each one. The process demanded steady hands and endless patience. These shells would be threaded onto plant fiber cord to make necklaces or bracelets, entirely decorative, entirely social. No one needed jewelry to survive. But humans have been making jewelry for at least 100,000 years, probably longer. Because survival alone was never enough. We needed beauty, status markers, ways to express identity and belonging. Those beads said something. I have connections to the coast. I have time to make beautiful things. I care about aesthetics. All of it communicated through a few shells strung on a cord. What's striking across all these activities is the specialization. Not everyone could do everything well. Your aunt had spent decades on stoneworking and had genuinely mastered it. Your brother excelled at antler and bone carving, but was only adequate at napping. The woman making winter clothing was the group's finest leather worker. When her skill was needed, Others offered food or help with other tasks in exchange. This wasn't exactly a market economy, but it was close, an implicit recognition that different people had different talents and that everyone benefited when individuals specialized. This was also quietly the foundation of something that would become increasingly important: social complexity. In groups where everyone could do everything equally well, there was little basis for hierarchy or status differentiation. But when individuals developed specialized skills that others needed, power dynamics shifted. The best toolmaker, the best leather worker, the best artist, all gained influence beyond mere physical strength or hunting prowess. And everywhere, children were watching. An 8-year-old boy sat beside your aunt, trying to imitate her movements with his own small stones. Most of his attempts failed. Nothing useful emerged. But your aunt encouraged him anyway, occasionally guiding his hand, showing him the correct angle. This was Paleolithic education. No school, no formal curriculum. Just constant observation and practice under the guidance of experts. By 15, this boy might be competent at basic tool-making. By 25, if he was talented and persistent, he might be skilled enough to teach others, and the knowledge would move one generation further, each iteration adding tiny improvements. Small refinements that would, over centuries, add up to technological revolution's dot. As the afternoon sun moved across the sky, the sounds of craft continued. Tapping, scraping, the crackle of the fire, occasional bursts of conversation. The material culture that made human life possible was being created. The foundation for everything that would come after was being woven. One patient strike at a time. If you've been imagining early humans wandering exhausted across the landscape, constantly hunting, constantly gathering, permanently on the edge of collapse, you're not alone. This image has been etched into our minds for decades. Life before civilization was supposedly short, brutal, and miserable, a relentless survival struggle, leaving no time for anything else. But when anthropologists actually began living among modern hunter-gatherer communities and counting their time, a very different picture emerged. In many hunter-gatherer societies, adults spend an average of only 4 to 6 hours a day on what we'd call work. Finding food, preparing it, maintaining tools, basic camp maintenance. The rest of the time isn't filled with frantic scrambling. It's filled, quite specifically, with nothing in particular. Resting, talking, playing, making music, grooming one another, staring off into the distance, simply existing. If your day 40,000 years ago were mapped onto a modern work schedule, it would probably astonish a corporate manager. Yes, there are bursts of intense effort, hours spent tracking an animal, hauling the heavy weight of gathered food back to camp, carefully shaping stone tools with precise focus. But those bursts are scattered among long, low-intensity stretches of flexible time. Time that bends according to your body's energy, the weather, the group's mood. So what did people actually do with all those hours? Much of it looks surprisingly familiar and strangely slow. You rest. This might mean lying in the shade, half listening to your relative's conversation. It might mean sitting by the fire, watching smoke curl upward, idly turning a smooth pebble between your fingers. When your body is your only real tool, taking care of it is part of survival too. Rest isn't laziness, it's maintenance. You socialize. In a small group of 20 or 30 people, conversation isn't outshone background noise. It's the very network that holds the group together. Every conversation about who spotted which herd, who found a new patch of tubers, who argued with whom last night, none of it is idle gossip. These are information-sharing systems, conflict management strategies, emotional first aid. You play with children. You let them climb over you like a living jungle gym. You show them how to throw a small stick at a target or how to hold a stone fragment without cutting themselves. Their play might look like chaos, but within it, they're rehearsing adulthood, building coordination, testing social boundaries, experimenting with risk and safety. For long stretches of the day, there's no urgent agenda, no tight schedule, no alarm dragging you from one task to the next. Life's rhythm is set largely by the slow cycles of sun, seasons, and animal movement, not by the hands of a clock. And in the midst of all that unscheduled time, something else begins to happen. People invent fun. Archaeologists have found small objects at prehistoric sites that don't fit neatly into the category of tool or weapon. Tiny animal figurines carved from bone or antler, smooth stone discs pierced through the center, resembling an early form of spinning top. Occasionally, oddly exaggerated little human figurines. For a hungry adult crouched by the fire, these objects might seem to have little practical use. But for a child, they're toys. Picture it, a small hand trying to spin a stone disc on packed earth. Two children play hunting with miniature spears made from twigs. A parent, half amused, half watchful, letting them get involved in a task that doesn't actually need their help. Play isn't an escape from real life. It is real life. Through play, children learn to aim, negotiate, share, lead, and follow. There are clues for adult play, too. Certain small stones and bones turn up together in patterns suggestive of dice or counters. Flat rock surfaces bear scratched lines that might have marked out game boards, where pieces were moved back and forth in quiet contests meant to pass time and reinforce social bonds. We don't know the rules they used or what the stakes were, but the impulse is clear. Once immediate needs are met, the human mind goes looking for patterns, for challenge, for small puzzles to solve. Games are structured imagination, and early humans, it seems, made plenty of room for them. Then there's music. In caves across Europe, archaeologists have discovered delicate flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory, some more than 40,000 years old. These aren't crude noisemakers. Some feature carefully spaced holes that produce recognizable musical scales. Someone sat down and experimented, adjusting each hole slightly, learning by ear how to turn raw bone into a working instrument. Imagine the moment someone in your band first drew music from one of those flutes beside the fire. The sky has darkened. The stars are beginning to appear. The embers glow. She raises the flute to her lips, breathes in, and a strange, clear sound rises above the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of voices. For a moment, everyone freezes. Then the notes repeat, hesitant at first, then steadier. Someone starts clapping a rhythm. Someone else strikes a stick against a log. Feet start moving. Bodies sway. The camp, quietly settling in for the night just moments before, suddenly comes alive with dance. Music and dance aren't secondary entertainment. They synchronize bodies and minds. When everyone moves together, breathes together, when voices rise and fall in unison, something powerful happens in the brain. Group identity strengthens. Anxiety dissolves. The world feels for a moment coherent and safe. In small, vulnerable early human groups, these moments of shared rhythm may have mattered as much as any spear or shelter. After the dancing comes the other great leisure technology, stories. You're back by the fire. The night has settled into quiet. A few last sparks drift upward, tiny glowing insects. The group's elders lean a little closer to the flames. Children lean against their parents. The band's best storyteller begins a tale. Maybe about the great hunt where the wind suddenly shifted and nearly ruined everything. Maybe about the time the river flooded and the whole group had to scramble to move camp. Maybe about a trickster animal who stole fire, or a spirit living in the storm clouds who punishes the greedy. Some of these stories are clearly rooted in real events. Others drift into myth and imagination. But all of them carry something. A warning, a clever strategy, a memory of who did what and why it mattered. Without writing, without any recorded archive, stories are the group's memory. They carry knowledge across years and generations, where clean water can be found in the dry season. Which plants bring down a fever, which ones kill. What happened the last time a particular social rule was broken? Listening to these tales by firelight, half awake, half drifting, you're not just being entertained. You're being gently, quietly prepared for the rest of your life. But not all the time is spent talking, playing music, or gathering around a story. Some of it goes towards slow, careful grooming. If you've ever watched a nature documentary about primates, you've seen this. Monkeys carefully working through each other's fur, picking out dirt and parasites, examining the skin with total concentration. It looks like simple hygiene, but it serves two purposes at once: cleanliness and bonding. Early humans did something similar, with a slightly different touch. No fur, but plenty of hair. You sit with your back to a friend, a sibling, or a partner, and they slowly run their fingers, or a simple comb of bone or wood, through your scalp. They check for small bumps, clear away flakes, crush an unlucky louse between their nails. It's both practical and soothing, an intimate contact that says, wordlessly, you matter, I'm paying attention to you. Then comes decoration. Red ochre, a naturally occurring iron-rich pigment, appears in human sites stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, usually ground into powder and mixed with fat or water before being applied to skin or hair. Sunscreen? Insect repellent? Symbolic body paint? Quite possibly all three at once. You sit while someone draws lines across your face, your chest, your arms, perhaps marking you as belonging to a particular band, perhaps signaling the status of someone who has just completed a dangerous hunt, or marking a role in some ritual. Hair gets braided, beards trimmed and decorated. Simple ornaments made from shell, tooth, or carved bone get woven into the hair or strung around wrists and necks. None of these actions are strictly necessary for survival. Food and water are. But they're part of how early humans transformed bare survival into a life-carrying identity. Beauty and meaning dot, and in among all this talking, playing, decorating, and music making, there are long stretches of something the modern world has almost entirely forgotten how to do. Simply watching. You lie on your back and watch the clouds drift across the sky. You sit quietly, tracing the path of ants carrying food back to their nest. You stand at the edge of camp, watching a distant herd graze, noticing how they cluster and scatter, how the wind carries their scent. You watch the patterns of stars, noticing how certain constellations rise at particular times of year, how the moon waxes and wanes. To a modern observer, this might look like boredom. But for early humans, this continuous, gentle observation was part of building a mental map of the world. It trained attention. It sharpened intuition. Someone who spent hundreds of evenings quietly watching the sky might be the first to notice an unusual cloud pattern that signals an approaching storm. A child who spent countless hours tracking animal footprints purely for fun might grow up to become the band's best tracker, without ever having received a single formal lesson. And there's something less practical, more mysterious here too. Without glowing screens, without written words, without background music streaming from distant speakers, silence and stillness don't feel empty. They feel full, full of the buzz of insects and birdsong, the sigh of wind moving through grass, the distant murmur of water, the soft breathing of people you love nearby. In that silence, the boundary between you and the world grows thin. You're not a separate mind trapped inside a frantic schedule. You're not someone glancing at nature through a window on vacation. You're a creature embedded within an environment, attentive to it, shaped by it. So a day in the life of an early human, 40,000 years ago, wasn't an endless blur of exhausting labor. It was a rhythm of effort and stillness, of focused work and unstructured leisure. Hunting, gathering, crafting, yes, but also joking, singing, dancing, grooming one another, decorating, telling stories, watching clouds, watching stars. Their lives were dangerous in ways ours mostly aren't. Disease, injury, and hunger were never far away. But they also had something that's become rare in much of modern life. Long, uninterrupted stretches of time, minds free to wander, the ability to simply be present with others without any particular agenda. And as the fire burned low and the last story faded into the warmth of the night, that spaciousness carried people gently into sleep. Tomorrow there would be work again, but also music and laughter and all the slow, quiet work of simply being human. Let's return to that ordinary day. 40,000 years ago, on the savannah or in the forest or by an icy river, you're not alone. You live in a band, not a village, not a town, but a tiny human world of maybe 20, 30, 40 people, rarely more than 50. Small enough that you know every voice, every laugh, every footstep in the dark. You could recognize who's approaching just from the way their feet drag slightly on the ground. You'd know a cough in the middle of the night. When a child's fever spikes, the elders remember past fevers and what worked. When smoke appears on the horizon signaling a distant fire, they remember the last time the forest burned, which animals fled which direction, which valley stayed safe. These are the walking libraries of famine and abundance, floods and drought, conflict and reconciliation. In a world without books, losing an elder is like a modern library burning down overnight. Which brings us to death. People died young, often from infection, injury, childbirth, hunting accidents, or simply falling from a tree. But what's striking in the archaeological record isn't just the fact of death. It's how people responded to it. We find graves, not just bodies dropped into pits, but careful arrangements. Skeletons curled into fetal positions, sometimes dusted with red ochre, as if prepared for a final journey. Tools, beads, meat, animal teeth, ornaments buried alongside individuals. In some Neanderthal sites, bodies appear to have been deliberately placed in intentionally prepared pits, perhaps even with flowers. This points to something far beyond simple disposal. It points to ritual. Perhaps your band believed the dead continued somewhere else. Perhaps they became animals. Perhaps they watched over the living. Perhaps there were stories of a shadow world beneath the earth or above the clouds. Whatever the specific belief, one thing seems clear. Death wasn't treated as nothing. When someone in camp dies, the usual rhythm breaks. Gathering trips are postponed. Hunts happen more quietly. People sit closer together at night. Words are spoken more softly. Children ask questions. Adults tell stories about the courage, generosity, or foolish mistakes of the person who died. Death becomes camp gossip too, but in a different register, not about behavior to be judged, but about meaning to be found. Carefully burying the dead does something for the living. It binds them together through shared grief, shared memory, shared fear, and shared hope. In this sense, social life and community weren't decorative additions to early human existence. They were the fundamental technology that made everything else possible. Your ancestors didn't survive because they were the strongest individuals. They survived because they were embedded in networks of care, obligation, communication, and memory. Around that small, intimately known circle of 20 to 50 people, the entire human story was already unfolding. Cooperation and conflict, love and jealousy, wisdom and foolishness, birth and loss, fire, tools, stories, and genes carried forward across the landscape by a small wandering tribe. As the sun sinks and the day cools, this web of community relationships shapes the final hours of your prehistoric day. How you gather around the fire, what you say, what you remember, and what you dare to imagine for tomorrow. Once the day's hunting and gathering work was done, when stomachs were largely full, and the fire had settled into a steady orange glow, something else began. Something that usually didn't fill the stomach or sharpen a spear, but still felt necessary. Your ancestors had another job beyond mere survival, making sense of being alive. Imagine the mouth of a cave as night falls. The last light fades outside. The air cools. Insects and distant animal calls begin to rise. Inside, the fire paints the walls with moving shadows. Someone picks up red ochre. Another unwraps a cord threaded with shell beads. In the half-light, people begin transforming both themselves and the world around them. To us, this looks like art and religion. To them, it was most likely simply life. Let's start with the world's most famous evidence. Deep inside caves, far from the entrance, in places no one would ever need to go to sleep or store food, there are paintings. Not casual scribbles near the entrance, not quick sketches made while waiting out the rain. Some of the most magnificent images of Ice Age Europe are found hundreds of meters underground, reachable only by crawling or climbing in places sunlight never touches. Horses, bison, lions, woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths, herds that seem to move across the stone itself as if the rock were alive. Carefully chosen curves in the cave wall become a bison's muscled shoulder, an animal's rib cage, the swell of a horse's chest. Some images are layered and shaded to create the illusion of movement in flickering torchlight. This wasn't interior decoration. No one lived there. To reach these paintings, people had to gather torches, fuel, pigment, and tools. They had to organize expeditions into absolute darkness. They had to know the cave well enough not to get lost. They deliberately chose these locations, then filled them, as far as we know, with images meant only for themselves to see. We don't know why, but there are clues. One possibility is teaching. Imagine your band's hunters bringing adolescents into the cave with torches in hand, pointing to the painted herds, telling stories. Where do you aim your spear? How does a wounded animal behave? Which season, which valley do the bison pass through? The cave walls become a kind of three-dimensional blackboard, a school hidden beneath the earth. Another possibility is ritual. In many traditional societies, animal images aren't just pictures. They're tools meant to influence reality, drawing the presence of a successful hunt before it happens, honoring the spirit of the animals that sustain you, even apologizing for having to kill them. The painted herds may have functioned less like pictures and more like prayers, or perhaps both, wrapped into myth, practical knowledge encoded into sacred stories, ritual hunts painted in darkness in preparation for the real hunt come morning. And the question still lingers, why so deep? A rock face outside would have worked just as well. Why risk the dangers of underground tunnels? Some archaeologists believe these deep chambers were chosen precisely because they cut people off from ordinary life. Down there, there's no day, no night, no horizon, no weather. Just stone, darkness, fire, sound, and whatever moves inside your own mind. This is a perfect setting for altered states of consciousness. This brings us to something we can't fossilize, but can reasonably infer: early spirituality. In many contemporary hunter-gatherer cultures, there are figures we'd call shamans, people who dance, sing, fast, or use psychoactive plants to enter trance states, journeying to other realms, speaking with ancestors, negotiating with animal spirits, healing the sick. If something similar existed tens of thousands of years ago, and the evidence suggests it's entirely possible, then carrying these ceremonies into the very belly of the earth, into deep underground darkness, would make perfect sense. In Europe's dark caves, archaeologists have found strange clusters of dots, lines, and geometric marks surrounding the animal images. Not just realistic pictures, but abstract signs, ladders, zigzags, dot sequences that may correspond to lunar cycles. Some researchers think these marks formed an early notation system, a way of counting days, tracking seasons, perhaps predicting migrations. Others think these shapes resemble what people see during trance states, geometric light patterns that appear behind closed eyelids. If that's true, these cave walls record not just animals, but experiences happening inside the human mind itself. While all this was happening underground, something else was happening on the surface. People were decorating themselves. Long before Europe's famous cave paintings, tens of thousands of years earlier, people in Africa were grinding red ochre, iron-rich minerals, into powder, mixing it with fat or water, applying it to skin, to tools, to hides used for dye. At sites tens of thousands of years old, archaeologists have found deliberately shaped and pierced pieces of ochre, and shells drilled and threaded onto cord. Small beads, smoothed from contact with skin or clothing, pigmented, worn as necklaces, bracelets, perhaps anklets that jingled when you walked or danced. Personal ornamentation might seem trivial next to hunting mammoths, but it points to a profound shift. Once you start decorating your body, you're sending messages without words. Color, pattern, and jewelry announce who you are and where you belong. Married or single, healer or hunter, member of this group, not that one. These beads and pendants may have carried stories too. A shell carried by someone living far from the coast could mean a trade journey, a memory of travel. A tooth from a dangerous animal could be a trophy, a reminder that you faced fear and survived. Red ochre appears again and again in burials specifically. Bodies stained red, pigments scattered, graves lined with it. Perhaps it symbolized blood, life, or the setting sun. Perhaps it was meant to protect the dead on their journey, or make them visible to spirits. We don't know exactly what it meant, but it clearly meant something got by roughly 35,000 years ago. This symbolic world grows even richer. It's no longer just beads, paint, and animal images. People begin carving the human body itself. Venus figurines, small statues carved from bone, ivory, or stone, mostly small enough to fit in a palm, share a strikingly similar style across enormous distances, from France to Siberia. Many exaggerate breasts, hips, and bellies. Faces are often minimal or absent entirely. Arms and feet are barely suggested. The focus is elsewhere. Pregnant, fertile, abundant-looking bodies. What were these? Some think they were fertility charms, kept by women hoping for healthy children. Others suggest an early mother goddess figure, embodying birth, nourishment, and the cycles of life and death. This isn't a coincidence. It's how your species is built. Groups too small can't defend themselves, can't cover enough skills, can't find enough marriage partners. Groups too large become unstable. Too much conflict, too many mouths to feed, too difficult to move together when herds migrate and seasons change. So natural selection, culture, and sheer practicality pushed your ancestors toward a kind of sweet spot, a society roughly the size of a living room. Intimate, flexible, deeply personal. Everyone in that small group has a place in your mental map. Who's generous? Who's lazy? Who can be trusted? Who shares food when a hunt goes badly? Who quietly slips a piece of dried meat into your child's hand when you're not looking? These invisible maps of relationship matter just as much as stone tools or fire. This is how your people survive, and where relationships exist, so does conflict. Not courtroom drama, not kings and judges. Ordinary friction. Someone took more meat than they deserved. Someone flirted with another's partner. Someone missed their turn tending the fire. In a group this small, you can't just walk away and never see them again. Tonight, you'll sleep 10 steps from them. So how do you keep the peace without police, without laws, without prisons? You reach for some of humanity's oldest tools. Gossip, mediation, reputation. In your world, gossip isn't idle chatter. It's your legal system, your news network, and your social media, all rolled into one. When two hunters argue over who struck the gazelle first, people notice. The story gets retold that night around the fire, reshaped as it passes from person to person, and by the end, everyone knows who acted selfishly, who was generous, who apologized, who held a grudge. Nothing gets written down, but nothing gets forgotten either. If someone hoards food, that becomes a story too. Remember when he hid that marrow bone for himself? People might be slower to share with him during the next famine. If someone shows courage during a dangerous hunt, or compassion toward a sick elder, that becomes a story too. These stories are your social credit score. They determine who helps you when you're in trouble, who gets entrusted with important tasks, who's allowed a voice in serious discussions. For bigger conflicts, there's no courtroom, but there are your elders. The old woman who's seen hundreds of arguments over meat and marriage and knows exactly how each one resolved. The old man who remembers the time two brothers nearly came to blows and how it was settled. They're not judges in the modern sense, but when tensions run high, people turn to them. They sit between the angry parties. They speak slowly. They bring up past events, add context, remind everyone of old debts and old kindnesses. Mediation is a survival strategy. In a group of 30, a lasting feud could be a death sentence. Split the group in two, and both halves become too weak to defend themselves, too small to travel far, too fragile to survive a bad winter. So the entire social system quietly leans toward reconciliation. People needle each other rather than confronting directly. They complain indirectly. They sing songs that hint at bad behavior without naming names. It might look roundabout, but that gentle pressure is powerful. It lets people save face, change course, back away from the edge without humiliation. Underneath all of this lies one simple truth. Your survival depends on other people. This starts from the moment you're born. In your band, children don't belong to a single nuclear family in the modern sense. They belong to the camp, to the group, to the network. Your mother matters, your father matters, but so do your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, older siblings, even unrelated adults who've become effectively family. Modern anthropology calls this cooperative breeding. In your ancestors' language, it was simply called life. Your mother has gone to gather roots. She might be carrying your baby sibling, or she might be processing meat. Someone else entertains you. An aunt sharpens your teeth marks on a piece of leather. An older cousin shows you how to stack small stones. A grandmother hums a rhythmic tune while braiding cord. Your brain quietly absorbs the sounds of your language. It takes a village. Here, that's not a metaphor. It's a job description. If your mother dies, or gets injured, or has to walk all day following a migrating herd, you don't disappear along with her. There are other breasts to nurse you, other arms to carry you, other minds invested in your survival. This redundancy, multiple adults caring for the same children, is an invisible safety net woven through early human life. It also allows people to specialize. Some adults are better at patient teaching. Some are better at rough play that builds balance and strength. Some are better at soothing you when you wake from a nightmare. By the time you turn 10 or 12, you've learned from an entire village of teachers, each contributing tiny fragments of knowledge, passed down from their own parents and grandparents. The relationships and partnerships in this world were likely far more varied than the simple one-man, one-woman forever template. Different environments, different cultures, different eras probably produced different patterns. In some groups, long-term pair bonds may have been the norm, partners raising children together and staying together for seasons at a time. In others, relationships may have been more fluid, forming and dissolving as circumstances shifted. In demanding environments where resource sharing was critical, arrangements we'd now call polygyny or polyandry may have occurred. What matters is this: there was no single, natural, prehistoric marriage model. What stayed constant was the need to manage jealousy, share resources, and protect children. Formal taboos, joking relationships, and unspoken rules developed to meet these needs. Who could approach whom? Who owed whom meat or favors? What could everyone openly joke about? These patterns functioned like silent traffic lights, helping everyone navigate the emotional labyrinth of desire, commitment, and responsibility A band of 30 isn't your entire world, though. Beyond the familiar faces circled around your fire, there are other bands, connected to you by distant kinship, old alliances, or simple habit, speaking similar languages or dialects. You might see them only a few times a year, but those meetings are some of the most important events in your life. Imagine a valley in late autumn, or at the end of the dry season, where resources are temporarily abundant. Herds gather, fish run, fruit trees hang heavy. News spreads not by phone or map, but through chains of encounter. A lone hunter runs into another band's member and mentions where game has been plentiful. A visiting cousin mentions a river bend full of fish. Slowly, bands converge. This is your festival. At these seasonal gatherings, trade flourishes. A man from a coastal group brings shells and dried fish. Someone from the mountains brings obsidian for blades. Others bring ochre for paint, worked hides, carved bone tools. Objects travel hundreds of miles in small increments, changing hands again and again. Every trade is sealed with conversation, stories, maybe a shared meal. Mating happens here too. If your band has only 30 people, you don't want everyone choosing partners exclusively from within that tiny circle across generations. Inbreeding is a silent killer, so alliances with other bands matter enormously. Young people meet potential partners from outside. Some return to your band with a new spouse. Others leave to join another group permanently. In modern terms, this is population genetics. In your ancestors' terms, it was simply life moving forward. These gatherings are also where knowledge spreads. Someone has discovered a new way to bind a spear point more securely with plant resin. Someone has found a valley that stays slightly warmer through winter. Someone has spotted a new predator in the region. Stories, warnings, and techniques ripple outward through these networks, like radio signals crossing a continent, but carried by memory and words instead of wires. All of this rests on one extraordinary shared trait: language. Not just grunts and gestures, but layered, flexible, combinable speech. Not just there's a lion, but 3 lions came from that ravine last dry season when the river was low. The ability to say, let's camp there with the little ones. The ability to explain a hunting strategy, a myth, a dream. 40,000 years ago, your ancestors possessed language every bit as capable as any spoken today. Different words, probably different rhythms, but the same underlying cognitive machinery. Syntax, tense, metaphor, jokes, insults, love songs, lullabies. Language lets your band coordinate complex hunts. It lets elders tell children about dangers they've never personally witnessed. It lets news of a drought in the next valley reach you before your own food runs out. And at night, by the fire, half asleep, language carries you through waves of quiet stories. Heroic animals, cunning ancestors, dangerous spirits, lost lovers. In this world, elders aren't pushed aside. They are a kind of hard drive. In a physically demanding life, an aging body can't do everything it once could. Knees ache, eyes blur, hands tremble slightly while knapping stone. But a mind seasoned by decades of experience grows more valuable with every passing year. The old man who can no longer chase deer still remembers which stars mark the changing seasons. The grandmother who can no longer forage far from camp still remembers which plants cure a stomachache and which ones kill. The elder who has lived through a brutal winter can tell when it's time to move, even when the sky and ground look deceptively calm. This isn't individual furniture. Sleeping spots follow a social map. Parents near their children. Elders placed where they're easiest to help and protect. People in tense relationships probably don't sleep side by side. Over time, everyone knows exactly where their spot is when night falls. These arrangements silently reveal status, alliance, and affection without anyone needing to say a word. And while this quiet work of bed-making continues around the edges of camp, something more dramatic happens at the center: dinner. It's tempting to imagine early humans constantly grazing throughout the day like livestock, but the evidence doesn't really support that. For many groups, the largest and most reliable meal, especially when meat was involved, happened in the evening, clustered around the fire. During the day, people might snack: a handful of fruit, a bone cracked open for marrow, a few nuts, or a roasted root grabbed on the move. But the full accounting of the day's success happened at night, around the fire. Food isn't just eaten, it's transformed. Meat gets roasted or boiled in skin bags or shell containers. Bones get cracked for their fatty marrow. Organs get cooked quickly before they spoil. Plant foods get pounded, peeled, ground, their toxins leached out through careful preparation. Someone drops roots into the ashes. Someone else rotates cures of meat. Someone keeps the fire at exactly the right intensity, adding wood at just the right moment. This isn't random chaos. It's a practiced choreography, and the distribution of that food is a social performance in itself. Who gets the first portion? Who gets the best cuts? Does the successful hunter keep most of the meat for himself, or does it get divided according to custom? Elders first, then young children, then everyone else? Different groups likely handled this differently, but nearly all of them understood one basic truth: behave selfishly at the big meal, and you won't survive long in a hunter-gatherer society. So the evening meal becomes a lesson in generosity and memory. People notice who shares, who hoards, who makes sure the child across the fire gets a piece of liver or fat, and who ignores that child entirely. These choices leave deep impressions. In a world without written law, these are the behaviors that shape your reputation, the behaviors that determine who helps you during your unluckiest stretch. While hands are busy, mouths are busy too. Conversation around the fire is where human social life concentrates most intensely. During the day, communication is mostly practical, often shouted across distances. At night, voices drop and the content shifts. People review the day. A hunter quietly describes how the gazelle bolted faster than expected. A gatherer laughs, recalling the moment she tipped over an entire basket of fruit. Someone brings up a small conflict from earlier, a sharp word, a broken tool, and the group smooths it over. because carrying that tension into tomorrow could be dangerous. Planning happens too. When will they move camp? Who will scout that distant ridge? Should they follow the reindeer herds north or stay a while longer by the river? These aren't formal counsels, but patterns emerge. Some people talk more, others listen and nod. A single quiet word from the right person can shift the whole direction of the conversation. Children absorb all of it, not just facts about animals and plants, but how decisions get made. What counts as persuasive? When to speak and when to stay silent. Then come the stories. Once stomachs are full and hunger's sharp edge has faded, the tone shifts again. Someone might begin with an old tale about an ancestor who killed a terrifying lion, or the time the river rose so high it swept away half the camp. These stories aren't mere entertainment. They're a repository of memory. In a world without writing, stories carry maps. Which valley holds bitter roots that are safe to eat only after being boiled twice? Which rocky outcrop hides good flint for blades? Where do dangerous spirits, in practical terms, sudden storms and flash floods, like to gather? These hard facts get wrapped in layers of myth, speculation, and open-ended imagination. Did people exaggerate? Certainly. But those exaggerations helped critical information stick in memory. Someone listening by that same firelight might add a different kind of story, one that reaches upward. Because above them, once you get far enough from city lights, is the same sky you can still see today. A sky crowded with stars, occasionally streaked by a meteor's brief flash, the ghostly band of the Milky Way arcing overhead. We'll never know the exact moment a person first looked up and wondered what that was. But it would be strange if no one ever wondered. Long before constellations had familiar names, people were probably already tracing shapes with their fingers, connecting stars to animals, ancestors, pathways. Maybe they decided a particular bright star was the eye of some great watching being. Maybe the Milky Way became the road spirits traveled after death. Maybe the moon's changing phases marked the moods of some powerful entity whose favor you wanted to win. None of it fossilizes, but the human brain hasn't changed that much. Give people time, a dark sky, and a dangerous world to explain, and they'll invent stories. Those stories shaped behavior, when to travel, when to plant or harvest in later ages, when to risk a dangerous hunt. Slowly, night after night, something like a cosmic calendar may have formed in their minds, woven from points of light no one could touch but everyone could see. But while eyes turned upward and thoughts drifted far away, bodies remained here in a very real and risky place. Night in the Paleolithic world wasn't safe. Beyond the ring of firelight, predators moved. Hyenas, lions, leopards, wolves. In some regions, they smelled the meat, heard the voices, felt the warmth. Most nights, the fire itself and the concentrated presence of humans were deterrent enough. But not always. There are fossil sites containing human bones, bearing the unmistakable marks of predator teeth. Caves showing layered use, humans one season, big cats the next. So someone always stays half awake. Vigilance becomes a rotating duty. Some people are naturally light sleepers. Others take watch, waking periodically to feed the fire, listening for any wrong rustle in the grass. Camp itself gets arranged to slow down anything approaching. Brush cleared in the most likely access points. Thorny branches piled at key entry spots. Sleeping areas clustered close enough that if one person startles awake, others can be roused within seconds. And in many late Paleolithic camps, there's another set of eyes and ears sharing that watch. Dogs or animals on their way to becoming dogs. Domestication seems to have begun in some regions around this time. Wolves slightly more tolerant of humans, slightly less fearful, willing to linger at the edges of camp. Over generations, these somewhat tamer wolves were tolerated, perhaps even encouraged, in exchange for gathering scraps and bones. They bark when strangers approach. They smell predators before you do. They can track a trail. They help with hunting. At night, they curl at the fire's edge, or press against sleeping bodies, sharing warmth, especially with the children. Their thick fur is a living blanket. Their ears twitch at sounds too faint for human hearing. A growl, a raised head, a sudden bark, an early warning system woven right into your household. Once you start relying on that, life without them feels more dangerous. So you do what it takes to keep them close. Layer by layer, a kind of alertness builds. Drowsy humans drifting toward sleep. A half-awake adult stirring the embers. Not quite domesticated dogs sniffing the wind, ears swiveling. Together, in a world that never fully sleeps, they create a small margin of safety. Slowly, conversation thins out. The fire drops from bright flame to glowing coals. Sharp orange softens into deep red. Someone tosses on one last piece of wood, not to cook anymore, just to keep the warmth alive until morning. Sparks rise and vanish into the dark, briefly mimicking the stars above before they fade. People find their places in their beds. Children wedge themselves between adults. Heads settle against warm shoulders. An elder pulls a hide up to their chin, hands tucked beneath their cheek. A tired, satisfied hunter lies down facing the fire, one arm draped loosely over the dog who decided to sleep there tonight. There's even a theory that some of these were self-portraits, made by pregnant women looking down at their own bodies, seeing their bellies, hips and breasts, but unable to see their own faces. We can't know for certain, but whatever their purpose, these figurines reveal something critically important. People had begun thinking of themselves as symbols. Not just this is a woman, but this small object represents something larger, womanhood, motherhood, life itself. And this symbolic thinking didn't stop at bodies and animals. It reached toward the sky. There are hints that some early humans paid careful attention to the stars. Only hints. At a few sites, notched bones and stones show sequences that might correspond to lunar phases, or to seasonal events like migrations and plant ripening. Some cave paintings show clusters that certain researchers believe overlap with star patterns visible at particular times of year. These interpretations remain controversial, but they wouldn't be surprising. If your survival depends on remembering when herds move, when salmon run, when certain plants become edible, you watch the sky. You notice patterns. Over time, you might begin to think of the sky itself as a vast story written just for you. And if the sky tells stories, maybe animals do too. Across hunter-gatherer cultures worldwide, animals are almost never just meat. They're people of a different kind. Teachers, tricksters, guardians. Bear who walks on two legs. A raven who steals the sun. A gazelle who gives fire to humanity. These stories aren't mere entertainment. They're moral lessons, ecological knowledge, memory maps woven into landscape. Your Paleolithic ancestors likely saw the world this way. When they painted a horse running across a cave wall, they may not have simply been drawing a horse. They may have been calling forth a spirit that moved like a horse, thought like a horse, saw the world from a horse's height. Angering that spirit might bring years of bad hunting. Honoring it might bring abundance. The result is a world where everything is alive with meaning. Rocks, rivers, trees, animals, clouds, stars, all beings, all carrying story and intention. And in that world, particular individuals emerge. Those who dream vividly. Those who notice patterns no one else sees. Those who can calm a panicking child or comfort someone in pain with words and song. These people may have become what we'd later call shamans, though we'll never know what your ancestors actually called them. Imagine an evening by the fire. The day's work is done. People have formed a loose circle. Some mend nets, some drift toward sleep. The one who moves between roles, storyteller, singer, healer, begins. A drumbeat rises, nothing more than a stretched hide over a frame, or a hollow log struck with a stick. The rhythm starts slow, like a heartbeat, then quickens. Voices rise. Feet find the beat. The group's breathing synchronizes without anyone noticing. After a while, you're not just listening to the rhythm. You're inside it. Music is among the oldest human technologies we know of. Bone flutes carved from bird wing bones. Hollowed antlers that could be played like wind instruments. Simple percussion instruments that left no trace in the archaeological record, but were almost certainly as old as language itself. In flickering firelight, rhythm and melody do something extraordinary. They dissolve the boundaries between individuals. When everyone moves to the same beat, sings the same phrase, claps at the same moment, the group becomes briefly a single organism. Fear shrinks. Time stretches. People slip into shared states of light or deep trance, using nothing more than breath, sound, and movement. In those moments, stories about animal spirits, ancestors, and journeys to other realms stop being mere tales. They feel real, because in some sense, you're experiencing something genuinely real, a different form of consciousness, minds within bodies, surrounded by other minds, and bodies doing the same thing. This is the social function of early spirituality. Not just explaining storms or what happens after death, but transforming small, fragile groups of humans into something strong enough to survive. Shared rituals, shared symbols, shared songs. The glue holding a band together when food is scarce and danger is close. Ring all of this together. The deep cave art, the beads and ochre, the carved figurines, the abstract markings, the music and trance, and a very different picture of early humans emerges from the crude caveman caricature. By day, they tracked animals, knapped stone, dug roots, read the weather. By night, they stepped into a different world, one where the dead perhaps listened, where the sky perhaps spoke, where animals held hidden souls and mountains remembered. They carried heavy spears and sharp tools, but they also carried invisible things. Myths, songs, rules, taboos, dreams. When the fire finally burned down and the last stories faded, ochre-stained hands were wiped clean on hides. Drums went quiet, and people lay down on grass and hide beds, drifting into sleep within a universe they themselves had helped create. A universe layered with meaning over the raw facts of cold, hunger, and danger. As they slept, the painted herds waited in the dark underground tunnels. Beads rested against sleeping skin. A Venus figurine lay buried near someone's head, or tucked in a pouch with other small treasures. Overhead, the stars turned slowly, whether anyone watched or not. When morning came, the practical work of survival would begin again. But that inner life, the songs, the symbols, the sense of hidden forces running through everything, never really stopped. It's still with us. We just use torchlight on limestone less often now, and screens in the dark more often. Instead of ochre on skin, we have digital avatars and fashion brands. Instead of ivory figurines, we have icons, logos, and characters that carry far more meaning than their physical weight would suggest. The tools have changed. The wiring underneath hasn't. In your Paleolithic camp, as night deepens, the last embers turn red. Someone shifts in their sleep. A child murmurs, then settles. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls and no one wakes. They've heard it 1,000 times before. Tomorrow will bring more walking, more gathering, maybe another hunt. But for now, in the silence between the crackling coals and the first light of dawn, the inner life of early humans rests. It hasn't disappeared. It's only waiting to be reborn with the sun and with the stories. Late in the afternoon, the light shifts. Shadows begin to stretch. Color drains from the landscape, and the temperature drops with surprising speed. For Paleolithic people, this isn't a beautiful sunset. It's a quiet alarm clock. Whatever still needs doing, finish it now. The landscape that felt open and measurable during the day becomes something else entirely in the dark. Depth perception collapses. Predators that rested in the shade all day begin to stir. So your ancestors start narrowing their world, pulling inward, directing their activity toward what has defined evening for at least 100,000 years. Fire. Not everyone always had fire. There were surely groups who occasionally lost it, or found themselves without it during travel. But for many late Paleolithic communities, fire was as central to evening as gravity is to your body. Not simply a tool, but a boundary. Inside the circle of light and warmth, us. Everything outside it, everything else. As the sun sets, people drift back toward that flickering center. Gatherers return with armfuls of wood, bundles of plants, sometimes a lucky find, eggs, honey, shellfish. Hunters arrive later, sometimes triumphant with meat, sometimes empty-handed and quiet. Children who spent the day playing and exploring pull their radius in too, drawn by that same invisible gravity. Volume shifts. Daytime work involves cutting, chopping, shouting across distances. Evening turns inward. You hear the crackle of wood, the soft thud of someone trying to nap one last flake from a stone tool, the murmur of voices settling into the glow. But before anyone truly rests, there's one more task as important as food, making a place to sleep. A bed might sound like a luxury, but it's actually survival technology. The ground is cold, damp, crawling with insects and parasites, and it draws heat from your body all night. Lie directly on it night after night, and your body pays the price. So your ancestors learned to put barriers between themselves and the earth. Archaeologists have found traces of ancient bedding, thick mats of compressed grass, leaves and aromatic plants, sometimes renewed repeatedly at the same spot over time. Think of it as a low-tech mattress. First, someone clears away the worst rocks and debris. Then a base layer goes down of dry material that traps air and resists moisture, grass, reeds, leaves. On top of that, maybe softer plants, maybe moss. Then, if available, animal hides, deer, gazelle, sometimes something larger. Fur side up for insulation, hide side against the ground for durability. The sounds of the night settle in layers. Closest, the crackle and sigh of the fire, the soft rhythm of breathing, an occasional murmur from someone's dream. A little further out, the rustle of small animals, the distant call of a night bird. Further still, the strange, drawn-out cry of hyenas, the deep, chest-rattling roar of a lion marking its territory. These distant threats are frightening, but also familiar, woven into the background of every childhood here. People learn to read danger by sound alone. The difference between a roar that means hunting and one that means frustration. The difference between a curious rustle and an approaching attack. Beneath all of it, the sky keeps turning. Stars slowly wheel toward the horizon. The moon rises or sets according to its phase. Clouds drift past, sometimes veiling the light, sometimes revealing more of it. Some members of your band fall asleep quickly, exhaustion outweighing anxiety. Others linger in that in-between space, not quite awake, not quite gone, thoughts drifting between the day's memories and the half-formed images that rise from firelight and stars. Maybe someone replays a near-miss from the hunt. Maybe someone thinks of a child lost last winter, imagining them somewhere among those distant lights. Maybe someone just listens to the breathing of people they love and feels something close to gratitude. Eventually, even the last watchers drift inward. The fire settles into a bed of glowing coals. The dogs rest their heads on their paws. For a few hours, this small cluster of humans is about as vulnerable as it will ever be. Eyes closed, weapons out of reach, minds elsewhere. And yet, in another sense, they've never been safer. Wrapped in the layers of protection they built themselves, knowing where to camp and where not to. A carefully tended fire, beds that keep the cold ground at bay, a circle of kin who would wake if someone cried out, the warning growl of an animal that, for reasons it may not fully understand itself, chose to stay close to them. That's what a day ultimately comes down to. Not mere survival, not an endless grinding struggle, but a shared center, warmth, story, the sense that despite every danger, this small circle of light in the dark is enough, at least until morning comes again. So after all this, what did early humans actually do all day? They worked. They walked miles searching for roots and fruit. They carried meat back to camp. They knapped stone until their hands ached, mending and remaking their tools. They fed their children. They watched the fire. They kept an eye on the teeth and claws glinting at the edge of the dark. But that wasn't all they did. They also sat. They stared into the flames and did nothing at all. They watched clouds drift over the hills, watched migrating herds pass along the horizon. They told stories slow enough to stretch across several nights. They played, not just children, but adults too, mock fights, small contests, teasing games with pebbles, sticks, and bones. They sang. They painted patterns onto cave walls and onto their own skin. They rested. Their lives were hard, but often not in the way we imagine. Not an unbroken sprint from dawn to dusk, but a rhythm of bursts of effort and long, quiet stretches of calm. Hours of intense, focused work, followed by the long, unhurried breath of simply being together, moving with the seasons, moving with the light. This is the balance most of us have forgotten. We've built machines that grind and lift for us, lights that turn night into day, more information in our pockets than any hunter-gatherer could have imagined. And yet somehow, many of us end up with less genuine free time than they had, less unstructured space, fewer evenings spent simply watching the world without checking a clock. The irony runs deep. We built tools to free up time, then filled that time right back up with noise. Your Paleolithic ancestors never scrolled anything. They never answered an email by firelight. Once the sun went down, there were only a few real options: talk, listen, make, imagine, or sleep. Their full attention belonged to the people around them, the flames in front of them, the stars above them. But strip away the technology, and the fundamentals that mattered then still matter now. Community. A circle of people who know your stories, who'd share their last piece of dried meat with you, who'd stand beside you if predators got too close. Today that circle might be family, friends, or an online community. The shape has changed. The need hasn't. Our nervous systems are still tuned for small groups sharing common work, common meals, common jokes. Creativity. The first carved bone pendant. The first handprint pressed onto stone. The first rhythm tapped out on a fallen log. None of it helped anyone catch one more gazelle. But it enriched life. It turned bare survival into a story worth telling. That drive to make something unnecessary and beautiful remains one of the most deeply human things we do. Nature. For nearly the entirety of our history, we woke and slept by daylight. We memorized the seasons. We read landscape the way we now read text. Even if you live in a city, some part of your brain still settles when rain hits your window, when wind moves through trees, when waves break along a shore. Those sounds are older than language, older than Homo sapiens itself. Purpose. Early humans didn't have 5-year plans, but they had reasons to get up. Feed the children. Help the group. Keep the fire alive one more night. Meaning was woven directly into daily tasks. Our purposes now might look more abstract, but underneath, the same question remains. Who am I doing this for, and why? Looking at their days, the walking, the watching, the talking, the work threaded with laughter and silence, we're not looking at some lost world we can never touch again. We're looking at a template, a reminder that a good human day has a certain rhythm to it. Effort and stillness, noise and quiet, togetherness and a little solitude. Simply by lying here now, resting, listening, you're already doing something deeply ancient. You're letting the day end. You're stepping back from the hunt of notifications and inboxes, back toward the fire. Picture that fire now, sinking into deep, steady embers. Most of the band is already asleep, curled beneath their hides, breathing slow and even. Someone tosses on one last piece of wood, not out of necessity, just out of habit. Above them, above you, the same moon drifts across the sky. The same constellations look down, shifted slightly over the millennia, but still themselves. 40,000 years ago, a child fought off sleep to hear one more story, staring up at those same stars. Someone reached over and stroked their hair, promising the hunt could wait until morning. Tonight, you're sharing that same simple human need. To stop, to feel safe, to let your mind release the day. The hunt can wait until morning. The world can wait until morning. For now, you can rest beneath that same ancient sky